Mike will go ahead and start selecting questions that were submitted from the audience so that we can get to those burning questions as well. All right, with that said, I think I covered everything. I'll go ahead and hand it over to Mike and jump off screen.
All right. Well, thanks for having me and the rest of the panelists. I'm actually next week I'm heading to the BVI's for a sailing charter, so I'm easing into it with this background. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Mike Berger. I built and led product marketing teams at Marketo, Gainsight, SurveyMonkey, and more recently ClickUp. I actually left ClickUp late last year to start something new that I'm really excited about. Before jumping into that, I actually took a nice trip to Patagonia, which if you follow me on LinkedIn, you might have seen my post. So that was a nice sort of breather. And now I'm jumping back into something new, which I'm not quite ready to share, but planting the seed here, but I'll share it in about a month or so. So that's a little bit about me. And excited to moderate this panel. We've got some great guests. And Christina, Dave, and Emmy, thanks for joining. I'm going to have all of you briefly introduce yourselves, and I'm going to do this in alphabetical order by first name, so there's some sort of logic here. Let's start with you, Christina.
Great. Hi, everybody. Nice to have you all join us. My name is Christina Dam. I am currently the Vice President of Product Marketing and Brand at Lightspeed Commerce. Lightspeed is a global point of sale and payments platform servicing the retail, hospitality, and golf industries. I've been here for about 1 year. Prior to that, spent 8 years at Square, leading and building and overseeing numerous product marketing teams for different product areas. Prior to that, the early career history is in a number of marketing agencies, a number of consumer electronics, like a mix of large global companies and early stage startups, and finding my home in PMM probably about 12 years ago now. So super excited to be here and join these wonderful panelists and have a great discussion on messaging, one of my favorite topics.
Thanks, Christina. How about you, Dave?
Hey, so I'm super excited to be here too. And it's funny, Christina and I have very similar titles, but they're very not similar when you think of background. So I lead brand and product marketing at GitLab. And it's so nice to have both product marketing and brand together. And it's so apropos to the topic that we're talking about when it comes to developing messaging, the ability to tell it at the corporate brand level, the solution level, the product level, and sort of deeply technical level is really a game changer in terms of sort of the fast feedback loops that you get. GitLab is a comprehensive AI-powered DevSecOps platform, which is just fancy to say where people who create software, they go on our platform and actually create it. And they do it really fast and really secure way. I've been at GitLab for about 2 years. I've been a marketer for just over 20 years. And spent a lot of it on the consumer side before making the jump from B2C to B2B, where I helped build the product marketing team at Cloudflare, then played around with early stage observability startup, and then came over to GitLab.
Great. Thanks, Dave. Welcome. Emmy?
Great. Hi. I'm really excited to be part of this group, so thank you for having me. But my name is Emmy Hofmeister. I am currently the head of product marketing for Lattice, which is an HR platform that people leaders use to manage performance and employee engagement, compensation cycles, and much more. And prior to Lattice, I was at Brex, and before then spent some time at LinkedIn as well as Adobe. So I would say, similar to Christina, I think I really built my PMM chops probably about a decade ago and just love the space that we get to operate in. I think PMM is this really diverse discipline of getting to work across so many different teams within an organization and working on such a range of projects. But also, like Christina, love the messaging component. So excited to dig in.
Great. Well, we're all in the right place. We all love messaging. I love messaging. So we've got a lot of great questions here, and we've got great experience across the panel. So it'll be I'm actually interested to hear all what you say and get some insight. So let's dig in. So I think the first question is around research. Obviously, when we think about messaging and positioning in general, like it all has to be based on something, right? And so there's a lot of research that we have to do, whether it be sort of research around obviously our customers, what those people who are not yet customers or prospects are thinking, what's happening across the competitive landscape, what problems customers are solving. There's a lot to sort of like take in before we get to a point where we feel comfortable, that we'll actually be creating the right messaging and positioning. So let's talk a little bit about research. So the specific question that I want to ask is, what kind of research do you all perform before putting pen to paper when you create messaging? So let's kind of reverse the order, I guess, and let's start with Emmy.
Great. So I think maybe I'll approach this. So you mentioned a lot of the different types of research. And what I will say is there's so many ways to do research. And I'm sure both Dave and Christina have some anecdotes here. You can talk to sales. You can really dig in with your product team to super understand your product. You can understand the competitive landscape. And you really need to do all of those things. But I think the framework that I use to understand where do I need to lean in, and then what is the outcome I'm looking for, is pretty simple. So it's 3 parts in search of the key insight that I'm going to use to inform my messaging. So the 3 parts are: 1, do I understand what's happening in the market? What are the market dynamics today that create the need for the product or the service that we're creating and delivering? The second piece is around really understanding the audience that you're speaking to. So what's the problem or the opportunity that you are presenting to them, that you're helping them solve? And so really knowing the customer and being able to dig in, understand the specific use cases, the specific need, as well as where they could grow. And I'll give an example here. And then the final piece to the framework is your brand or your product. So what makes you uniquely positioned to be able to tackle this? And together, those 3 elements create that core insight or create the messaging that you want to deliver. So I think, really quick example, one of the products that I launched in my career was an insights product at LinkedIn. And in terms of understanding the market at the time, it was a really competitive talent acquisition space. It was taking a long time for companies to hire. There was a lot of people looking for the same type of talent, the same skill sets. And what we saw and what we learned with our audience by talking to them is how did this impact them? And it impacted them, of course, by not getting the right talent into the company at the right time, by maybe missing deadlines or opportunities that had real business impact. And more so, what we learned is that companies that had access to data were doing better than companies that didn't, because they were able to identify maybe hidden pockets throughout the company or throughout the country, or locations where they were hiring, where they could find the skill sets or the talent that they needed. So companies with the data were doing better. And of course, our unique positioning as LinkedIn, both with this product, but as the platform, was that we had just incredible amounts of data on people and talent and where they were. And so together we were able to say, okay, the positioning here, the research we have across these different dimensions, and the position is that we are going to help the talent acquisition leaders, the people leaders at these companies, make more strategic decisions, be more impactful to the business, because they are empowered with this data. And so really researching and digging in through all the different methods that are available across those 3 areas is what I like to do as I set up every kind of positioning exercise.
That's great. And when you say digging in, that really resonates with me. I think you just got to keep digging and digging until you find what you really need to get to the right sort of insights to develop great messaging. So with Christina, what would you add to that? Or what are your thoughts around research?
Yeah, I mean, I would love the framework that you just put together. I mean, kind of clearly articulates like the different kind of categories of what you need to think about. And I think I typically always start with that customer and, the customer insight first. And particularly if it is something that you are creating messaging around a launch or a new product introduction or functionality, that there's probably been some research that went into why we are building that thing in the first place. And so that's always step 1, is go back to like, what do we know and what's informed like the direction that we've taken to date in investing in this problem area. And the reason I do that is to just ground myself in like that problem space and the value that we are trying to create, and like starting from that value and that benefit, and then going and kind of unlocking the creative process about like, how might we then message or articulate that value and that benefit. But then you kind of layer on the other sources, and just playing off of the avenue of the customer insight is yeah, it's reading forums, reading feedback. What is the language that they use so you can really meet them authentically with the language that they would understand the point you're trying to make. So yeah, a similar example I think would be we launched when I was at Square a handful of years ago, we launched a new invoicing app. And this was a whole repositioning of this solution that was going from, a payments tool that was used by merchants who were primarily using a point of sale, but every once in a while they needed to send an invoice as well, and really switching that to be, targeting businesses that is the primary reason or way in which they get paid. And it was a whole repositioning of the offering. And one of the things that we had the customer insight, we understood this is going to help you get paid fast, but that's also something that most payment products are aimed at doing. But we were trying to find what is that unique value that an invoice does or a digital invoice is providing that, a handheld terminal or, a peer-to-peer payment might not offer. And it really anchored in on the emotional benefit of not having to worry about that payment happening. And that you don't have to go chasing in that awkward moment of asking your customer, hey, I sent you that invoice. We did that service. Are you going to pay me? And it was due last week. A lot of the tooling takes care of that. So all of a sudden that benefit was less about getting paid, but also reducing the worry and the anxiety around that. And that ended up kind of anchoring a lot of the creative messaging that we built around it.
Yeah, that makes sense. You mentioned problem space and language, and I think that those are really important concepts. I think ultimately most solutions are trying to solve a specific problem or set of problems, and the language piece really resonates with me because one of the ways I like to think about it is you basically want your messaging to join the conversation that these people are already having in their heads, right? And so you want your messaging to join that, and so but if you don't know what that conversation is, you don't know the language they use, that's hard to do, right? So that makes a lot of sense. Dave, how about you?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that makes it so challenging is there's so many conversations that are going on in market right at the same time, competing for the attention of the people that you're trying to be in front of. And so I think that's one of the fun things about being a product marketer is that from a research perspective, you're always researching. There's never a start or a stop. It's this continuous, I like to think about it in the way that there's a book I recently read called The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. If you haven't read it, awesome book. But he talks about creatives from the perspective of they've got the best antennas or the biggest antennas. And I think product marketers are a lot like that. Our antennas are always up and we're consuming so much information from podcasts, from the market, from the competitive landscape, from your salesperson, talking to customers. And then our job becomes, how do you synthesize all of this in a way that, as you all just brought up, leads to a key sort of insight? And so I think getting to that insight and getting to it from a customer perspective is super important. One of the frameworks, and it's great that we're bringing up frameworks, one of the frameworks that I've really gravitated to in doing this, specifically from sort of a positioning strategy perspective, is the obviously awesome one. This is the book by April Dunford, and I've been using it for a while. It's such a good framework because it enables you to really think through, first, what are the sort of competitive alternatives to this thing that you're going to bring to market? And based on that, what are the features that you have? And what's the differentiated value that brings? And only then, when you figure that out, you go, okay, now who cares about this? Who really cares about this differentiated value that you're going to bring? And to me, what that gets to is who is the customer that actually cares about this thing that you're going to bring to market? And then how do you develop the right both positioning, strategy, and key set of things to say to that person? And so for me, in my background, a really good example, several years ago, I was at PayPal. And it was at a point where PayPal was an up and coming brand, and we were really trying to differentiate from other ways to pay. And the other ways to pay were Visa and MasterCard, mainstay brands that everybody knew. And we did a ton of research in every one of those things that I brought up, and we came across this customer insight, which is the one differentiated value that we offer that they don't. Isn't just speed, and it isn't just you can pay online, because they were doing the same thing, but it was privacy, that you could shop without sharing your financial information. So we had a core audience base that cared deeply about what happened to their credit card information. And they were really afraid about handing their credit card out online. And with PayPal, they found out that they could shop without sharing their financial information. And so once we got that insight, we put it in market. It was all over the place. And we saw the pre-post in terms of where our brand stood against these, massive brands. And we saw a significant difference in that. So it's all about that customer insight.
That's great. I love the framework. And I think the differentiated value is kind of everything, in the world of product marketing. So let's shift gears a little bit. We just talked about all the research that product marketers you need to be doing in order to create effective, messaging. Now let's talk about actually creating the messaging, and more specifically, I think, like as a product marketer, I know I probably share this feeling with all of you, that when you look at messaging that is either extraordinarily verbose or filled with jargon or super vanilla, and therefore kind of like, what does this even mean? What do you take away from it? Like, it drives me bananas personally. I'm sure it drives all of you nuts as well. So the question here is, what are some effective strategies that you all have for writing messaging that's clear, concise, and compelling? I call them the 3 C's: clear, concise, and compelling. It isn't so full of jargon. So let's start with Dave on this one.
Okay, we're switching orders around. This is good.
Yeah.
Mine are not. Thanks. Mine aren't super strategic, but they're the go-tos that I always think about. The first is, and it's super important for me because I speak to sort of both a deeply technical audience in my current job, and the C-level executives who oversee that audience. So jargon is bad. It doesn't work for any level. My go-to things look like this. First of all, anytime I see an acronym, I de-acronym it at the beginning, because usually what happens with an acronym is it's a shorthand that is almost like inside baseball. Not everybody knows about it. So it really, by taking out the acronym, it helps you more clearly communicate what you're trying to do. You can go back to the acronym, but the first time you bring up a concept, make sure that it's sort of not that acronym. I do 2 other things that I think are fun to do. First of all, I embrace new tools. So Grammarly is not a new tool, but it is a go-to. So if anyone is developing messaging, content, copy, or anything, I highly encourage you to use Grammarly or Grammarly-like tool and some of the AI tools that are out there. They really help keep you sharp and really help you kind of think about different language to use that isn't full of jargon. And then the final thing that I do is actually keep a scrapbook. It's actually my notebook app on my laptop. And anytime I spot really good copy, I kind of copy it down. And it serves as really good inspiration that I continually go back to and fill up. And so for all of you out there, as you're thinking about developing crisp messaging, look around you. You will see really good examples. You'll see a lot of really bad examples, but the good examples, highly encourage you to just like jot it down somewhere.
That's great. Good insights. Christina, how about you?
Yeah, a couple other things, and I would agree this is less of like a framework answer and more of just the process that I typically follow. I would consider myself something like the first time I take a pass, I just acknowledge that the first time is probably going to be full of jargon. It's going to be too full of business speak, but sometimes you need to just get that version out and then tear it apart once you've gotten it down on paper. Because sometimes we just get caught in our day-to-day and we're just hearing the words that we use internally to describe things. But then as I go through and, you've got to give yourself time to edit. I think that's the other thing. And like the biggest challenge that I see faced is when people just don't have enough time and they don't invest enough time in thinking about the messaging, that they can't go back and iterate and simplify and try to really put it in a more kind of creative or authentic voice, and then take the time to validate and vet, is this communicating what you think it's going to communicate? And so I'll often do that very casually with, grab a couple trusted sales reps or people on other teams that might roughly kind of understand or be a proxy for an audience, but not be too close to, the subject area, that you can kind of get feedback. And I think that validation and that vetting and editing process is incredibly important, because it will only get better over time. I remember like early on in my career, I worked at Apple in their marketing communications group for a while. And when you would walk into the office, there was this little mantra on the door which said simplify, crossed out, simplify, crossed out, simplify. And I've just held that with me like over the years, like how can we like just challenge ourselves to like get as, remove all the extra fluff from what it is we're trying to say. But you don't have to do it alone. Work with others. Yeah.
I think honestly, that's probably the one that's most difficult for product marketers. It's, if you think about exhaustive in terms of messaging and compelling, those things just don't go together very well. And I think in a lot of cases, and I've certainly seen it driven by, especially CEOs, maybe founders, others that have really strong opinions around messaging. They want the whole story in there. And so in a lot of cases, they're pushing the product marketing team to be more exhaustive in their messaging, which is hard. It's a hard environment to work in. So that's the thing I always take away is like, just try, to your point, like cut, right? Yeah. Just get away from this like feeling that you have to be completely exhaustive and say anything. But it can be hard to make those choices. Yeah. How about you, Abby? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, I think it's also become more and more a trend that not all teams necessarily have copywriters that they have the opportunity to work with. But if you do, like the partnership with your copywriting and content teams is so important in this, because you can start with a core idea and just that collaboration and brainstorming together to like reduce or think about different ways in which you can communicate that message. Like I've learned so much from the writers that I've had the chance to work with over the years. So that's
that is a great point. I think that's a great, like, I think when you work together with a copywriter and they start to understand what you're trying to convey, and then they can help you convey it in a way that maybe you hadn't thought of, like that's where the magic happens. Emmy, what about you?
Yeah, I'd be a big +1 to the partnership with copywriters. I think where you have that, it's great. That leads me maybe to my latest way of checking my language and making sure what I'm saying is clear is leaning on ChatGPT. Like, here's what I have, here's what I'm trying to say. Can you help me crisp it up? It doesn't, it feels a little bit like a cop-out, but it almost replaces where you don't have a copywriter. It replaces that relationship of like a little bit of back and forth of starting to surface ideas or even terminology that maybe wasn't top of mind for me, but actually fits the bill perfectly. So been loving playing around with just AI tools, but specifically ChatGPT. I think the other thing, and you were hitting on this a little bit, Alex, but, Mike, but the kind of like zeroing in, like when we want to be comprehensive, it's sometimes easier to actually zero in on a specific segment or use case and really pull in that customer insight that we were talking about before. If we can speak to a use case, if we can speak to a particular audience segment, I think it helps remove some of the jargon, because the specificity of what we're saying and the point that we're trying to make is so concrete that it helps us clarify the words and just get the right message into the market.
Yeah, 100%. Or if there is jargon, it makes sense, right? Because if you are messaging to such a narrow slice of your audience that uses jargon, then at least they'll make sense of it.
That's right.
Dave, were you
I was just going to say that makes a lot of sense too, from the perspective of when you get into segmented comms, segmented marketing, you get out of problems like speaking to investors in the same way that you would speak to customers, or speaking to customers the same way you'd speak to employees. So, and that's also, it is a roundabout way of also getting back to the thing that Mike brought up in terms of like working with CEOs and founders who want to be extraordinarily comprehensive, being able to walk them down this path of saying, hey, we can be very comprehensive to this audience over here. Now, for this audience over here, we're going to take sort of a different approach based on the insights that we have of those people. So it helps you get out of those problems.
Yeah, maybe one last thing I'll add that just came to mind as you were speaking is I think your sales team, like at least in my experience, my sales team is always like my best resource for even like the beginnings of the copy, the beginnings of the positioning. They're out there talking the talk every day and just have so much perspective on what are the words that are landing really well. What is that, what are the comparisons that we want to bring into play? I think building that relationship, just as you might build your relationship with your copywriter, building the relationship with a couple of trusted reps who are doing great at their jobs, definitely look for that is a good way to really fine tune the language that you're delivering.
Yeah,
All right.
plus one to that for sure.
All right. Well, I'm gonna play moderator and do his job and like move us on, because I know we're gonna run out of time here. And these are all great insights, but we've got a couple other topics to cover. One of them is, like, we'd all like to think that we are marketing solutions that, across the entire feature set, it does everything 10x better than everything else out there, right? Wouldn't that be great? But the reality is, this is, especially in software, like things are copied, very quickly, right? And many of us find ourselves marketing products that don't really have any very clear and compelling differentiators. We've probably all been there. So I'm wondering, like, how do you all think about messaging for a product like that doesn't have one or many, in a perfect world, very, very compelling differentiators compared to the competitors? Let's start with Christina on this one.
Yeah, this is a great question. And I will admit my first reaction hearing it is to say, well, something has to be differentiated. Maybe it's not the product. Maybe it is the audience that you are focusing in against your competitors. Maybe it is the way in which you're selling it. Like, what is the go-to-market motion? Like, I think the challenge first is to figure out what is it in the overall, like, solution proposition or value proposition that is something that you can build some differentiation around to stand out from the crowd. And maybe that's just how your brand shows up, and like you tie that kind of brand voice together and you're telling the story in a more unique and compelling way. This is actually something that we've been thinking a lot about at Lightspeed, which is, we participate in a pretty crowded point of sale market. There's a ton of competition, and, yeah, as you mentioned, like in software, year over year, like the table stakes keep raising, right? And so there's just more and more expectation from the solutions. But one thing we've done is kind of focused more on a very specific segments in the market. And as we can kind of articulate who that is, we can speak more directly to that audience. And in that way, kind of speak about the specific, how these features are serving those use cases to serve the goals that we believe they are trying to achieve in a way that's different from the competition. So I think that's kind of, the way in which I would say this is also the kind of the creativity and challenge of product marketing, is to think about, like, well, there's, how might we position that story in a different way that it can stand out.
Right. And it may not be just the product, right? If you look at it more holistically, right, maybe the service, right, how you partner with your customers, et cetera.
That's exactly right.
How about you, Emmy?
Yeah, I think this is an opportunity for more research. I mean, it is assuming that you have customers. If you are a net new product that doesn't have any differentiation, I might check your strategy. But if you've been in the market, or if you're in the market and it's really competitive, or your product's becoming more of a commodity, presumably you have customers, and there is a reason that customers chose you over the other options that are available. And so going back to the customers, doing the research, why did they choose you? And really starting to build, a thesis or an approach that's based on, some of the rationale that you understand for why people are making the decisions that they're making. And, maybe leaning into a couple of the areas that might be influential. I think, Christina, you hit on it, brand. I think there are brand perceptions that are really powerful, even if you're selling more of a commoditized product. Why do people buy the iPhone versus Samsung, right? Like there might be better features delivered by a different company or a different product or brand, but your brand holds the cachet that you want among the audience that you're looking for. I think the second area that probably isn't talked about as much, but is a really powerful part of the product that you sell, is the service or support that's associated with it. So you might have an undifferentiated product, but the best support, care, services, that are available, which ultimately make your customers more successful and happy with the products that they're purchasing. And I think that the final area is price. Can you be competitive? Like, do you offer a better price? Do you offer more value for the price? Are you a premium offering? And that's going to appeal to a particular segment. I think that there are ways to further differentiate across like a number of different dimensions, even if it's not, feature by feature differentiation. And just like a personal anecdote, I, on the service side, like I pay more for fiber internet that I get through a local provider because of the service. Like I know if I have a problem, a real person is going to answer the phone, they're going to send someone out that day, and I'm going to be able to get the support I need without having to jump through the hoops of an AT&T or Comcast or another provider. And people make those decisions even when, the price isn't necessarily working in their favor.
Absolutely. I'm hoping that your internet doesn't freeze up right here.
I know this is going to be the classic case where it's like the internet goes down and it's like, don't use this
Like
local
Murphy's
provider. But so far, so good.
Yeah. Brand, I think Brand, you said it. I mean, brand there's such a huge opportunity, especially in B2B around brand. I think, the company I came from, ClickUp, I think was a good example of that, where they entered a very, very crowded market and they have an amazing product. But I think in a lot of ways, the investment they made in brand helped them really stand out and gave them some early traction in a very crowded market. Dave, what about you?
I mean, big plus 100 to everything you all are saying. I had the same reaction to this question that Christina had right at the beginning, which is there's got to be something. And I think
maybe find a new job, right? Maybe choose a different company.
Maybe choose a new job. Right, exactly. At the end of the day, if you can't find something, then maybe choose a new job. The other thing is like this is where product marketers like earn their keep, doing this really, really hard work. There's always something. I think the anecdotes that you all are bringing up really speak to this. Like, yeah, sometimes it's the features, but it's not. I mean, it's the whole product solution, and that is both a rational thing and it's an emotional thing. And if you dig in really deep to understand the competitive alternatives, and think about it through those different axes, you're going to find something that truly differentiates your product. I'd say a couple of other things. One, it's kind of a team sport. You're not on your own doing this. And so as you do this, if you find it really difficult to figure out where the differentiation is, bring together your core sort of like positioning group of somebody in sales, somebody in product, and somebody in other teams, and really go deep with them. Again, using frameworks like the one that I brought up earlier, you're going to find the answer of based on this differentiated, or based on this value that I offer the market, who cares a lot about that? And that, again, that value might be an emotional one, it might be a rational one. My own personal anecdote is like this advertisement that happened when way back when I was a kid. There used to be for car rentals the ad between Hertz and Avis, and Avis was like number 2, and there wasn't anything really differentiating these two brands. And so the insight that they got is, hey, we're number 2, we try harder. And that advertising campaign, the Avis We Try Harder one, catapulted them into the pole position of the market, and they rode it for a really long time. So again, if they can figure out a way to take car rentals, which are like not differentiated at all, I don't even think on price, and use this more emotional service-oriented component, I think you're going to be able to do it with your product. The last thing that I'll say is this: there will be the time when you can't find differentiation. And that is the product marketer's dream, where you can then say, this is insight that I can go to the front of the product creation chain and work with my PMs to say, this is what we're seeing in market, and here's where we need to actually build and actually inform what the product roadmap is like. And I would lean into that as well.
Great. All right. Well, I'm going to move us along. And for this, I'm going to ask one more question, then we'll move to the audience questions. And let's try to be brief with this one. And I just want each of you to share one thought or strategy around the question of, because I think most of us, especially any of us who have enough experience, have run into this, like, and basically it's like, how have you dealt with leadership, right? That doesn't really buy into the messaging that you've already created or that you're thinking about creating. So yeah, again, this one certainly resonates with me. I've been there, but yeah, maybe just start with you, Dave. Let's just one strategy or thought around this topic, and then we'll all move on to the audience questions.
Yeah, I'll be super quick on this one. They have to be a part of the process. Now, it doesn't mean they are part of the process all the way through, but find the right touch points to bring in your key execs so that they are participating in it with you, not just because you want them to feel like they're part of the process, but they have a context that you might not have. So bring them in.
Great point. How about you, Emmy?
Yeah, I love what Dave just said. But from my end, data, right? Like if you have the research, if you've done the work, you can pull that forward to showcase this is what customers are saying. This is what's working well. We've tested these different messages, but I think having them in the mix as you are, conceptualizing what this message is going to be is really the key to ultimately that message landing, because they, it's probably their company or they're leading the company and they have a strong opinion and an informed opinion about what's going to land.
Okay, great. Christina?
So I agree with both of those points. And when that doesn't work and there's a strong opinion, I always lean on well, let's test it. And, if there's two different strong opinions and there's reasonable arguments behind each approach, then there are also a lot of ways in which you can get additional data and pit them against one another. And I think there's a lot of lightweight ways in which you can do that, or actually just put it market and let the market decide, because ultimately you want the one that's going to work best in the live environment.
Yep. Okay. All great points. And I think that the takeaway should be that everyone as a product marketer, your life's going to be a whole lot easier if you can get your executives aligned around your messaging, and it's going to be a lot more difficult. And you probably won't be there too long if you don't. So we'll end with that. So let's move to the some of the audience questions. There's a lot of good questions here. I'm going to start with this one. So since we talked about the executives and their role in crafting messaging, but this question was which stakeholders are involved in crafting the messaging and positioning at your organizations? How do you get alignment and avoid having too many chefs in the kitchen? I think that last point, especially the too many chefs in the kitchen, can be really problematic. So let's, does anyone want to just jump in and answer this one? Otherwise I can select someone, but if anyone feels really strongly about it on the panel, let me know.
I'm happy to jump in.
I picked Emmy.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief because I'm sure there's a lot of good other thoughts on this, but I think that at various companies, it has looked really different. So I have gone from, the LinkedIns and Adobes of the world, where interestingly, I think there was a lot more focus on product marketing, developing the message, really owning it kind of top to bottom. And of course, we would do the research and bring in the right inputs and stakeholders along the way. As I've gone to more startups, it's been interesting that despite it being a smaller organization and everybody trying to move fast, there are a lot more stakeholders that have perspectives and opinions that want to weigh in. And so in my, in the current role, certainly myself, my team are driving the process, but the CMO, the head sales is very involved. Even product has like a pretty strong perspective. And of course, if you have a founder, the founder is going to have a strong perspective as well about what they want to say in the market. So I think it's a little bit dependent on the size of the company and where the company is at in terms of growth and scale. But product marketing is really the tip of the spear in terms of driving the strategy, driving the program, and knowing at what point to pull in the right people to provide their opinion, or to say, okay, this is the message you want to lead with. Let's finesse it, let's refine it, and let's make sure that it works.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think your point on it can be very different, is really resonates with me. I think, and some of it's just sort of a little political, if you will. Like people at certain companies just have a lot of influence, and their opinions very much, trusted. And so like, those are the kind of people you want to search out. And if you can get them on board and align with them, it's going to make, everything kind of that much easier. Anyone else have any thoughts on this particular one, or should we move to the next?
I would just add that there's very often this like consolidation of positioning and messaging together. And I think you can actually separate those things out, because what I've found like more critical, and this is actually part of what April Dunford talks about, and obviously awesome, is that positioning is actually more of an internal alignment conversation. And where is it that you are actually showing up to compete? And that I feel is the area where there is the most debate and conversation, particularly if you're looking to adjust or shift that. And then the messaging is actually, there's a lot of different ways that you can bring that to life. And so sometimes I found that the stakeholders, like if you can get them aligned on the positioning, like the messaging ends up being a little bit more fluid. And you can also, if you hold that perspective in mind, you can almost be more willing to take all those different ideas because you actually want all the ideas from around the organization that help inform that creative process of how you want to communicate the message.
Yep, all great points.
I have only one other thing that I'm going to add. So like, it's kind of on a super tactical front, but I think it'll help product marketers navigate the choppy waters here, because this is really hard to get right. Because what you don't want to do is invite a lot of collaboration and then everyone is co-writing your copy, and you end up with something that is like generic and it just doesn't work, and you're just catering to the person with the loudest voice or biggest title. I think the comment of like try to separate your positioning strategy from messaging is totally right. One of the things that I talked to my team about as well as they develop their messaging house is to go around to the key group of stakeholders that offer different perspectives on the product and how you're going to take it to market. So it usually involves someone from product management, a set of people from sort of the marketing team, and a set of people from sales and customer success primarily. Gather those opinions and also approach it with sort of the roles and responsibilities in mind. Their job is to provide you with feedback and give you coaching and counsel based on their perspective, but their job isn't to approve it. And so I've talked to my team a lot about this because they'll feel like they're kind of navigating around getting approval from 20 people. And I tell them, no. You might have to get approval from one person, but you want to get counsel from these 10 people. And that has really helped, I think.
Let's stick with you, Dave, because you mentioned generic kind of messaging. And one of the questions that we got was, seems like almost, and everyone can chime in here, but we'll start with you. Seems like almost all the messaging I see these days are to make something easier, better, or faster. This is all quite boring. How do you think about messaging so that it's accessible, readable, but not generic, boring, redundant? And yeah, so this is one that we've all seen a lot of this messaging. So yeah, what are your thoughts on this problem that we all face?
Yeah, no, I picture in my mind this graveyard where like old tired messaging goes to die, and it's like faster, better, easier.
Accelerate, streamline,
accelerate this and that,
and
you know, I do this as well sometimes. I try to catch myself early. I think the thing when you spot these words, I think the thing that you do is like first spot them quickly and then go, what's the deeper idea behind this? What's the deeper way that I can communicate this concept of fast? So as an example, GitLab, if there's an adjective I want GitLab to own, it's fast. But I'm not necessarily going to communicate just fast. I'm going to use things like customer case studies. I'm going to use stats. I'm going to use a variety of things that ultimately ladder onto this adjective that I want us to own, but doesn't necessarily over rely on kind of a generic way of doing it.
Yeah. Any other thoughts, Emmy, Christina?
No, I mean, that's it. That's exactly where I was going to go. I think maybe just a different way of saying what Dave just said is tie it to like, what is the actual business impact for the customer that you're talking to? You know, like what does doing this faster or better mean for the outcomes for their business? Presumably you have that understanding. And if you can crisp that in there, it becomes more interesting and less generic.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on. Maybe we'll start with Christina on this one. There are a number of questions that have come in. I'll try to basically like group them together around message testing. Like, so, you know, you've created the messaging, like you're super psyched about it, maybe, you know, go have a drink and celebrate and so forth. But how do we know it's actually working, right? And so there's tons of different ways that we can test. How do you, and one person also asked more about like what audience to test with. There were a couple of questions that sort of, you know, focused on that. And I have some opinions around like, you know, there's a difference between testing with your existing base, you kind of within your echo chamber a little bit versus like try to find someone, you know, outside of that or people outside of that to test with. So Christina, like, can you share your thoughts around like, how do you validate that the messaging is right? How do you test it?
Yeah, totally. I think as with all things you can do, like what's the quick and scrappy way to test something, and then what is the long and drawn out and more like I don't know, exact or rigorous way that you could get a result. And I typically try to fall on the, like, what can we do more quickly to give us the confidence that we can, like, put it in market. But this also comes with the context that very often the things we are putting into market are not necessarily going to be, you know, something you can't change or walk back from or adjust in the future. But if you're doing like a multi-million-dollar like media campaign, you're going to want to probably spend a little more time like testing that message than when you're working on press releases and website updates and things like that. So getting to the answer, I would say a couple of my favorite tactics, particularly for the prospect audience. I love user testing as a tool. I've worked mostly with SMBs, and they have pretty good panels, and also coverage for international countries. And so that is something that is just very easy to spin up and get that immediate feedback on a couple different messaging options. And not only do you get a sense of what they like best, but you get the qualitative context around why. And so even if something isn't hitting, you actually get a bit more information about what you could do next. And then the other way, particularly if it's with the existing customer base, I think like a sample email campaign to like a smaller audience and do like either A/B testing between them or just sending a one-time email out and see what that response is. That helps generate just a ton of initial insight when you compare that against your standard kind of results and baselines.
And just to clarify, I know, with user testing as an example, and I know there are other tools like Winter they're getting more popular. Are these actual interviews you're conducting? Are they, so is that when you say qualitative, I know they some different methods of testing through some of these platforms, but give the audience a little bit of a sense of like what's actually.
No, great call out. No, these are, so with a tool like user testing, you could do either moderated or unmoderated testing, but for a lot of this, I will do unmoderated, where you kind of you set up like, here's even like a mock-up of a page that's got a headline and like a paragraph below it, and you can have them read it and like just give their reactions to it. So you can prompt them with questions, and it's all recorded in videos, and you get the transcripts or you watch them all, and you can kind of analyze the results there. And they do have some new AI tools that make that translation of the results quite a lot faster than having to sit and go through every minute of the interviews. But so that's what I mean by the qualitative. You actually hear their perspective, but you're not necessarily taking the time and effort to do a one-on-one interview. You can get like a bulk of 15 to 20 responses within just a day or two.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful. And it's always fascinating to watch it all unfold. Yeah, and see what their response is. Any other thoughts on the message testing front, Dave, Emmy?
I'll add, so another plug for Winter, because I do think Winter is really great for just testing before you get things out and get really qualified feedback on it. So just a quick plug for them. But the other, it depends on your company and kind of like how fast you're able to move, but just putting as much out there as quickly as you can gives you a good sense of what's landing and what's not. So obviously you don't want to put out a bunch of disparate messages, but you can maybe have a more hyper product focused message versus maybe a more values focused message. And you put a couple different things out there, whether it be, via email, or you have a headline on your website, or you run a campaign around a particular message. But you can start to get a sense of, we've done this recently, and it's like, oh man, people are really gravitating more toward our product led messaging versus some of the more value led messaging. So let's lean in there, at least with this audience, or at least around this product, because we know that we're getting good responses here. So I think just quick iterations and having that baseline, having the benchmarks that how to assess from. But the faster you can see what's working, the more you'll be able to tighten that message and really make a mark.
Yeah,
I'm convinced that the key to winning is held by product marketing, and product marketing embracing fast feedback loops in the way that you just brought up. Creating structures within your company, particularly with sales development and sales and demand generation and all these functions that can take your message, put it out in market, and give you fast feedback loops back. I think that's the key to actually winning really quickly in market, and product marketing is in the driver's seat when it comes to that. And so really embrace fast feedback loops. I'd also say like a shout out to Mark Van Lake. I don't know if I'm pronouncing your last name right, but this idea that you put in the Q&A of like putting landing pages out there that test different ways of doing that's another great way to test.
Okay, well, let's jump on another topic, which I don't know if any of you have actually heard of this AI thing. I'm just now hearing about it. But I mean, seriously, it's crazy, right? Every single company, at least in the software space, is basically positioning themselves as an AI company. On one, it's almost like by not seeing it these days, like you're a little surprised versus like it being different by seeing it. And I think a lot of product marketers right now are grappling with how do we bring AI into our story, and at what sort of layer in terms of the messaging hierarchy. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure you all have thoughts on this one. So someone feel free to jump in. Like, how should we be thinking about AI as it relates to messaging, and is it just being used so much that it's just completely diluted? And if so, what do we do about it? Who wants to start with this? This is an easy one. I'm just kidding.
I'll jump in. I think the first thing, because we've actually been working through this a lot recently, and particularly because some of our like product teams are starting to integrate it in our solutions in some way. So we've been having this active debate about how do we talk about this and not feel like we're just forcing ourselves into like the topic of the moment. And I think it really just comes back to like the conversation we had at the very beginning with what's the customer value that we are enabling with the use of AI through our solutions, and still making sure that there's that very clear connection of what it's unlocking. And so that's kind of been where we've tried to do it. There's extensions to that with like, okay, well, do we want to have like a thought leadership perspective and join the broader conversation in the market about AI? And that, again, we want to do something that's like authentic to the brand and in a way in which like we have a right to say something in the industry we're playing in. But I think all of that just has to tie together, or that's just gonna like read as forced and like inauthentic.
Yep. All right. Well, we got another minute or so. Any other thoughts on the AI conundrum?
Yeah, we should spend another hour just on AI, because I think that there's a lot collectively as product marketers can learn about.
Alex is thinking about his next topic. Here you go.
Alex is our own personal AI. The I think the only thing that I'd add on top of that is really, as product marketers and people who are in charge of the positioning messaging strategy, embrace authenticity. To the point that you just brought up, like it's got to be brought up in the context of real value that you're delivering to the customer. And the reason why I say that is because the hype cycle on this thing is like completely accelerated. And we're now on the other side of the hype cycle for a lot of the companies that were at the beginning, where people have tried AI solutions and they're not as advertised. And so we're entering into an audience that's kind of cynical about AI and really wants to understand it better. And the best way to do that is to really be clear and authentic on what's the business value that you're driving.
Yep. Any last thoughts, Emmy, before we call it?
I mean, I think those answers are both great. Maybe again, like a reiteration, but I think a lot of like all of us are trying to figure out what are the use cases? How do I apply this in my company? If a lot of times we're selling to leaders of a department and they're trying to figure out what is the impact of AI going to be across my department, across the way we operate, the velocity of our work, et cetera. And so I think getting to those use cases, but to that point of like, this is a moment for maybe any company, but particularly tech companies, to partner with their customers, to educate their customers, and to co-create some of that value of really understanding, well, where do we see the potential impact sitting, and how does that inform your ability as a leader to be more effective than your competitors, right? And I think those are the conversations that we're starting to have, and where AI really sits is we're helping to educate our customers what the potential is, and then how that advances them and their business.
Great way to end it. Well, Emmy, thank you for that. Christina, thanks. And Dave, thank you. I thought, you all just shared a bunch of great insights. I'm sure that the audience members found it all very valuable. Yeah, appreciate everybody jumping on. And Alex, thanks for putting this. I'll turn it back over to you to wrap it up.
Okay, yeah. So